Anger is a paradox. On the surface, it is a negative emotion, a state of distress, agitation, and conflict. We tell ourselves that we do not want to be angry. We tell ourselves that we are forced into anger by the intolerable actions of others. But this is a lie we tell our conscious minds. The subconscious truth is far more dangerous. Anger feels good. When you experience moral outrage, when you are convinced that you are right and someone else is egregiously wrong, your brain does not merely prepare you for conflict, it rewards you. Righteous anger triggers the release of dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure, motivation, and reinforcement. It is the same chemical cascade triggered by gambling, by sugar, by narcotics. You are not just angry, you are high. Outrage provides an immediate, intoxicating sense of moral superiority. It grants sudden clarity to a confusing world. It transforms you from a passive observer of chaos into an active crusader for justice. In a life that may feel devoid of meaning or agency, anger provides an instant, powerful substitute for purpose. This is the foundational secret of every high-control group, every demagogue, and every algorithmic feed. If you can convince a person that their anger is a virtue, they will become addicted to the neurochemical rush of their own rage. To understand how this addiction takes hold, we must look at the architecture of the brain itself. In 1995, psychologist Daniel Goleman popularized a concept known as the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is the primitive alarm system of the brain, responsible for the fight or flight response. When it perceives a threat, it floods the nervous system with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Crucially, during an amygdala hijack, the brain bypasses the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic, nuance, and rational thought. The primitive brain seizes total control. You do not think, you react. In the ancestral environment, this mechanism saved lives. It allowed early humans to instantly fight or flee from a predator without wasting precious seconds on analysis. But in the modern information environment, the predators are not physical. They are ideological. When you encounter a piece of content designed to trigger moral outrage, your amygdala cannot distinguish between a physical threat to your body and a conceptual threat to your worldview. It triggers the exact same hijack. Your heart rate elevates. Your cortisol spikes. Your prefrontal cortex shuts down. You are biologically incapacitated from understanding nuance. You are chemically locked into a state of absolute certainty and aggressive defense. And because this state is accompanied by the dopamine reward of righteous indignation, you do not want the hijack to end. You actively seek out the next trigger to maintain the high. If human biology provides the vulnerability, social media provides the industrial-scale exploitation. In 2021, internal research from Facebook was leaked, revealing a chilling architectural decision. The platform's algorithm had been programmed to treat the angry reaction as 5 times more valuable than a standard like. Content that provoked rage was systematically prioritized, amplified, and pushed into the feeds of millions. This was not an accident. It was an optimization. Anger drives engagement. Outrage keeps eyes on the screen. A landmark 2021 study published in Science Advances by researchers at the Yale Human Nature Lab analyzed over 12 million tweets to understand how this environment shapes human behavior. They found clear evidence of reinforcement learning. When users expressed moral outrage and were rewarded with likes and retweets, they became significantly more likely to express outrage in the future. The platforms function as digital Skinner boxes. They train us, through the intermittent reinforcement of social approval, to become increasingly aggressive. We learn that nuance is ignored, empathy is invisible, and moderation is punished with obscurity. We learn that the only way to exist in the digital architecture is to scream. The algorithm does not care about your politics. It does not care about your morality. It cares only about the friction of your engagement. It is a machine designed to harvest your amygdala, hijack, for profit. The Yale study revealed an even more disturbing secondary mechanism. Reinforcement learning, changing your behavior because you are rewarded with likes, is only the first stage. The second stage is norm learning. As the algorithm amplifies outrage, the overall environment of the network changes. Outrage ceases to be an acute reaction to a specific transgression. It becomes the baseline ambient temperature of the community. The researchers found that in ideologically extreme networks, users conform their expressions to match the hyper-aggressive norms of their peers. In these environments, norm learning overshadows reinforcement learning. Users no longer need the dopamine hit of a like to express outrage. They express it automatically because it is the only acceptable dialect. To speak without anger is to risk being identified as an outsider, an enemy, a traitor to the cause. This is the normalization cascade. The extreme becomes the standard. The frantic, hypervigilant state of the amygdala hijack is accepted as the normal condition of waking life. When an entire group is locked into this state, they become entirely malleable to the leader, the algorithm, or the egregore that directs their anger. They cannot self-correct because the prefrontal cortex, the mechanism of self-correction, has been permanently bypassed. When outrage becomes the baseline, it fundamentally alters the architecture of the self. Psychologists and neuroscientists study a phenomenon known as shame-rage conversion. When an individual experiences a deep, intolerable threat to their self-esteem, when they feel powerless, inadequate, or profoundly ashamed, the psyche cannot bear the weight of that vulnerability. To protect itself, the mind converts the inward-directed pain of shame into the outward-directed weapon of rage. Anger becomes a defense mechanism against the void. It is a psychological armor that protects the fragile ego from the terror of its own inadequacy. Over time, this defense mechanism calcifies into identity. The individual no longer just feels angry about specific issues, they are their anger. Their entire sense of self is constructed around their grievances, their enemies, and their moral superiority. But this armor is toxic. Chronic anger keeps cortisol levels permanently elevated. Research by neuroscientist Bruce McEwen and others has shown that prolonged exposure to these stress hormones physically damages neural connections in the brain. The addiction to outrage does not just warp your worldview, it degrades your neurological hardware. You become a hollow vessel, structurally dependent on the very anger that is destroying you, terrified to let it go, because without it, you would have to face the void underneath. The architecture of vulnerability relies on your unconscious participation. It requires you to believe that your anger is a righteous response to the world, rather than a chemical dependency engineered by the environment. The escape velocity begins with a single, radical act of defiance. The pause. When you feel the surge of moral outrage, when the amygdala flares, when the heart rate spikes, when the absolute certainty of your own righteousness demands immediate expression, you must do nothing. You must recognize the physiological sensation not as a call to action, but as a symptom of a hijack. You must observe the dopamine craving without satisfying it. You must refuse the algorithmic demand for your friction. By pausing, you force the brain to re-engage the prefrontal cortex. You break the automatic loop of stimulus and reaction. You reclaim the territory of your own mind from the machines and the demagogues that seek to farm it. Anger is a signal. It tells you that a boundary has been crossed, but it is a terrible master. To deprogram yourself from the cult of outrage, you must learn to metabolize anger as information, rather than consuming it as an identity. You must be willing to endure the temporary discomfort of nuance, the vulnerability of uncertainty, and the quiet isolation of the void. Because the alternative is to spend your life as a battery, burning yourself out to power a machine that does not care if you exist.